The knife was already in the wine. Lyra saw it, not the blade, but the intention. The way Lord Merrin's fingers lingered too long on the goblet's stem. The way his smile didn't reach his eyes when he offered it to Kael. Her new husband, the Alpha King who ruled through terror, reached for the cup. And Lyra, who had been a nameless archivist 3 days ago, who had no power, no voice, no right to speak in this brutal court, she knocked the wine across the table. If you want to see how a forgotten woman became the queen who terrified warlords, watch until the end. Like and comment with your city below. Part 1. The Silent Alpha and the Reluctant Bride. The wedding had been a funeral dressed in silk. Lyra stood in the center of the great hall, her hands locked together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Around her, the northern lords and their armored retinues filled the stone chamber like wolves circling a kill. The air stank of wet fur, smoke, and something darker, the kind of fear that settled into your bones and made a home there. She had been married for exactly 4 hours. Her husband hadn't said a single word to her. Kael Draven sat at the head of the table, his massive frame slouched in a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single block of obsidian. His face was all hard angles and cold indifference, scarred along the jaw and temple. His eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, tracked every movement in the room with the mechanical precision of a predator calculating which throat to tear out first. He was exactly what the rumors promised. A monster. A killer. A king who ruled the northern frontier not through law or loyalty, but through the simple, undeniable fact that no one had managed to kill him yet. The stories painted him as something less than human. They said he'd slaughtered his own father to take the throne, that he'd crushed 3 rebellions before his 20th year, each one ending with heads mounted on the fortress walls, that his wolf, the beast every alpha carried inside, was so violent, so uncontrollable, that he'd buried it so deep it might as well be dead. Looking at him now, Lyra believed every word. Lyra's father had sold her to this man for a grain treaty and a promise that the southern caravans wouldn't be raided for 2 years. She wondered if he'd gotten a good price. The memory of that conversation still burned. Her father, Lord Edmund Vale, hadn't even had the decency to look ashamed when he told her. He'd simply walked into the library where she'd spent the last 6 years cataloging his collection, set a contract on her desk, and informed her that she was to be married within the week. "It's a tremendous opportunity," he'd said, his voice flat and businesslike. "You'll be a queen. Most daughters would be grateful." Lyra had stared at the contract, at the list of goods and concessions, at her name written in like an afterthought at the bottom of the page. "I'm not most daughters," she'd said quietly. "No," her father had agreed. "Most daughters are useful for making alliances through beauty or charm. You have neither. But you have a mind, and apparently that's what the Alpha King requested. A wife who can read, who knows history, who won't bore him with simpering and gossip." He'd said it like it was a compliment. Lyra had packed her things that night, her hands shaking with rage she couldn't afford to express. She'd left behind her books, her journals, everything that mattered. The northern territories didn't care about poetry or ancient treaties or the careful restoration of crumbling manuscripts. They cared about survival. And now, sitting in this hall full of men who looked at her like she was a temporary inconvenience, Lyra understood exactly how little her life was worth. "Your Majesty looks contemplative." The voice came from her left. Lord Davrick, a heavy-set man with a beard like iron wire, leaned toward her with a smile that didn't hide the calculation in his eyes. He was one of Kael's bannermen, a minor warlord who controlled the eastern passes. His fingers were scarred, his knuckles thick from years of gripping a sword. "I was thinking about my father," Lyra said quietly. "Ah, a sentimental bride. How charming." Davrick's smile widened. "Tell me, does the king know he's married a poet? I'm an archivist. Same thing, isn't it? Both professions involve living in the past." He reached for his wine, his eyes never leaving her face. "Though I suppose that makes you uniquely suited for this place. The North remembers everything, every slight, every betrayal, every drop of blood spilled on these stones." The threat was casual, almost friendly, but Lyra heard it clearly. She was an outsider, a southerner, a symbol of Kael's willingness to negotiate rather than conquer. And in a court built on conquest, that made her weak. Lyra didn't answer. She'd learned early in her life that silence was safer than wit when dealing with men who considered intelligence a threat. Davrik chuckled and turned back to his plate, losing interest in her as quickly as he'd found it. Across the table, Kyle still hadn't moved, hadn't looked at her, hadn't acknowledged her existence beyond the brief, cold ceremony where he'd placed a ring on her finger without meeting her eyes. The ring was iron, not silver, not gold, just plain dark iron, already leaving a faint mark on her skin. She wondered if he even remembered her name. He doesn't. Lyra froze. The voice had come from nowhere, not from the hall, not from the men around her, but from somewhere inside her head. Low, rough, and laced with amusement that didn't match the grim atmosphere of the feast. Relax. He's not going to eat you. Probably. Her breath caught. She glanced around the table, searching for the speaker, but no one was looking at her. No one had spoken. The lords were deep in their own conversations, voices low and conspiratorial. Servants moved between the tables like shadows, refilling cups and clearing plates with practiced silence. Up here, sweetheart. Your new husband's skull. Cozy, isn't it? Lyra's gaze snapped to Kyle. He sat exactly as he had before, motionless, silent, his expression carved from stone. But there was something different now. A tension in his shoulders, a faint tightness around his eyes, like he was bracing for something. Oh, she can hear me. Fantastic. This is going to be fun. The voice was coming from him. No, not from him. From something inside him. Lyra's hand started to shake. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The Alpha King was cursed, they said. Possessed. His wolf was a beast so feral, so uncontrollable, that he'd learned to suppress it entirely. Some claimed he'd killed his own wolf, ripped it out of his own soul to maintain control. Others said it had driven him mad, and the silent, emotionless king was all that remained, a hollow shell puppeting a dead man's body. No one had ever mentioned the wolf could talk, and no one had ever suggested it had a personality. And no one's ever been able to hear me except him, the voice continued, clearly enjoying her panic. So either you're special, or this marriage just got a whole lot more complicated. My money's on complicated. It's always complicated with him. Lyra forced herself to breathe, to focus. She was trained to observe, to catalog, to find patterns in chaos. This was just another puzzle, a terrifying, impossible puzzle that defied everything she understood about the world, but a puzzle nonetheless. She looked at Kyle again, trying to keep her expression neutral. This time, his eyes flicked toward her. Just for a second, just long enough for her to see the cold, clinical assessment happening behind them. He knew she could hear it, and he had no idea what to do about it. Neither do I, if we're being honest, the wolf said. But hey, at least the wedding night won't be boring. Lyra nearly choked on her wine. She set the cup down carefully, her mind racing. The bond between alphas and their mates was supposed to be instinctual, primal, a connection that allowed them to sense each other's emotions, to fight as one unit, to protect each other without words. But this was different. This wasn't a vague sense of feeling. This was a voice, clear, distinct, and apparently capable of independent thought, which meant either she was losing her mind or something about this marriage had activated a bond that shouldn't exist. Third option, the wolf offered helpfully. I'm just that charming. Lyra pressed her lips together to keep from responding out loud. Are you unwell, Your Majesty? Lord Marin had appeared at her elbow like a ghost. He was younger than the other lords, sharper, with the kind of face that belonged in a court far more civilized than this one. His clothes were finer, too, tailored wool and polished leather, a stark contrast to the rough furs and battle-worn armor of the other men. His smile was perfectly polite, perfectly empty. Everything about him screamed danger. I'm fine, Lyra managed, her voice steadier than she felt. You look pale. Perhaps the journey was more taxing than anticipated. Marin gestured to a servant who hurried forward with a fresh goblet. The wine inside was dark red, almost black, catching the torchlight like liquid shadow. Here, this will settle your nerves, a specialty from my family's vineyards. We've been cultivating the grapes for 3 generations. The servant set the goblet in front of her with trembling hands. Lyra's instinct screamed. She didn't know why. There was no reason to suspect anything. Marin was a lord in good standing, a trusted advisor to the king.
The wine was just wine. The servant was just a servant. But the way Marien held himself, shoulders too stiff, smile too fixed, the way his fingers curled around the stem of his own cup, knuckles white with tension, the way his eyes darted toward Kyle, just once, before returning to her, the way the servant who'd poured it stepped back too quickly, disappearing into the crowd before Lyra could get a good look at his face. "Don't drink that." The wolf's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade, sharp and urgent. Lyra looked at Kyle. His face was still a mask, but his hand had moved, just slightly, toward the knife at his belt. The movement was so subtle she almost missed it, but it was there. He'd seen it too. But he wasn't moving, wasn't acting. He was waiting, watching, trapped in whatever silent game of chess he played with his court every single day. Because reacting would show weakness, would show that he suspected treachery, would give Marin the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under the king's skin. So he sat there, frozen, while a poisoned cup sat inches from his new wife's hand. "He's going to get us both killed," the wolf muttered. "Someone do something." Marin held out the goblet, his smile never wavering. "Your Majesty?" Lyra took it. The metal was cold against her palm. She could feel the weight of every eye in the hall turning toward her, could sense the shift in the room as conversations died and attention focused. And then, in one smooth motion, she turned and offered it to Kyle. "My lord husband has barely touched his drink all evening. Perhaps he would prefer this one." The hall went silent. It wasn't the quiet of respectful attention. It was the silence of a trap springing shut, of a blade hanging in the air, of everyone holding their breath to see where the blood would land. Marin's smile cracked, just a little, just enough for Lyra to see the rage flash behind his eyes before he locked it down. Kyle's eyes locked onto the goblet, then onto Marin. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. "Oh, she's good," the wolf purred, practically radiating approval. "I like her. Can we keep her?" "That's unnecessary," Marin said, his voice a shade too tight, too controlled. "The king has his own cup. I wouldn't want to, I insist." Lyra kept her hand extended, her expression perfectly serene, perfectly demure. She let her voice soften, playing the role of the dutiful southern bride. "A wife's first duty is to see to her husband's comfort, isn't it? And he looked so thirsty." The words were honeyed. The message was poison. She was calling him out, in front of the entire court, without saying a single accusatory word. Marin's jaw clenched. Around the table, the other lords had gone still, watching the exchange with the hungry attention of men who smelled blood in the water. This was entertainment, politics, the delicious spectacle of watching someone squirm. Davrik was grinning openly now. Kale didn't move. For one terrible, endless moment, Lyra thought he wouldn't take it. That he'd leave her standing there, exposed and humiliated, holding a poisoned cup in front of the entire court, while her accusation hung in the air like smoke. Then his hand closed around the goblet. Their fingers brushed. The touch was brief, barely a second, but Lyra felt it like a shock of static electricity, a jolt of recognition, of connection, of something that shouldn't exist between 2 strangers who'd been married for political convenience. And the voice in her head laughed, low and vicious. "Checkmate." Kyle set the goblet down on the table, didn't drink, didn't even look at it. Just placed it carefully on the wood, his movements deliberate, controlled. But the message was clear. He knew. Marin's face went ashen. He opened his mouth, closed it, then forced a brittle laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Of course. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I only meant to show hospitality to our new queen. I didn't intend to overstep." "Leave." Kyle's voice was quiet, barely more than a whisper. It cut through the hall like a whip crack. Marin flinched. For a second, just a fraction of a moment, Lyra saw real fear cross his face. The kind of fear that came from standing too close to a predator and remembering suddenly that you were made of meat. Then he recovered, smoothing his expression back into something resembling dignity. "As you command, Your Majesty." He bowed stiffly, the movement jerky and wrong, then retreated into the crowd. But not before his eyes found Lyra's one last time. The look promised retribution. The hall stayed silent for another beat. Then conversation resumed, louder now, more animated,
as the lords processed what they'd just witnessed and began calculating how to use it. Lyra sat down, her hands shaking so badly she had to hide them in her lap. "Not bad for your first day," the wolf said, his tone approving. "Most queens don't make it through the wedding feast without getting poisoned. You're already ahead of the curve." Kale's gaze slid toward her. This time it lingered. And for the first time since she'd arrived in this frozen, brutal place, Lyra saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. Curiosity. Maybe even the faintest hint of respect. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, his expression shuddering closed again. But it had been there. Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She'd survived her first test. Barely. The feast dragged on for hours. Lyra sat through course after course of roasted meat and heavy bread, through toasts that felt more like threats, through conversations that circled her like sharks testing for weakness. She smiled when expected, nodded when appropriate, and said as little as possible. All the while, the wolf kept up a running commentary in her head. "That one, Lord Garrett, he's been embezzling from the grain stores. See how he won't look at the king? Guilty conscience." The woman in the corner, Lady Thorne. "Don't let the sweet face fool you. She poisoned her last two husbands, and Davrick over there is planning to ask for a tax reduction. He's been practicing his speech all week. It's terrible. Someone should tell him." Lyra bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. "Does he ever stop talking?" she murmured under her breath, barely moving her lips. Kale's hand tightened around his cup. He didn't look at her, but she saw his jaw clench. "Never," the wolf said cheerfully. "It's my best quality." Finally, mercifully, the feast ended. Kael stood without ceremony, and the hall fell silent immediately. He didn't make a speech, didn't thank his guests, or offer any traditional words of celebration. He just turned and walked out, his boots heavy on the stone floor. Lyra hesitated, unsure if she was supposed to follow. "You are," the wolf supplied, "unless you want to stay here and play politics with the vultures." She stood quickly, gathering her skirts, and hurried after him. The corridors of the fortress were a maze of stone and shadow. Torches flickered in iron brackets, throwing dancing light across walls that looked like they'd been carved straight from the mountain. The air was cold, biting, nothing like the southern estate she'd grown up in. Kael didn't slow down or look back. He walked like he knew she'd follow, like her presence was a given. It should have annoyed her. Instead, it was almost a relief. At least he wasn't pretending to care. They climbed a spiral staircase, then another, ascending into the upper levels of the fortress. The sounds of the feast faded behind them, replaced by the howl of wind and the distant clang of the night watch changing shifts. Finally, Kael stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. "These are my chambers," he said without looking at her. "You'll sleep here." He pushed the door open. The room beyond was exactly what Lyra expected. Massive, sparse, functional, a bed that could sleep 4 people piled high with furs, a weapons rack along one wall, a desk covered in maps and reports, a single window overlooking the frozen wasteland beyond the fortress walls. No books, no art, no tapestries or decorations, nothing that suggested a human being lived here, let alone a king. "It's," Lyra started. "I don't care what you think of it." Kael walked to the window, his back to her. "The servants will bring your things in the morning. If you need anything, there's a bell by the door." "Where will you sleep?" "Elsewhere." "Liar," the wolf said. "He'll sleep in the chair by the door. He always does." Lyra glanced at the chair in question. It was positioned perfectly to guard the entrance, angled so that anyone sitting in it would have a clear view of both the door and the bed. "You don't trust your own guards," she said quietly. Kael's shoulders tensed. "No." "Do you trust anyone?" "No." The answer was flat, final, a door slamming shut. Lyra should have left it alone, should have accepted the boundaries he was drawing and retreated to her corner of this loveless arrangement. But she'd spent 6 years in a library learning to ask questions no one else thought to ask. "Then why did you agree to this marriage?" she asked. "If you don't trust anyone, why bring a stranger into your home?" Kael turned slowly. His eyes were chips of ice in the firelight. "Because even I can't rule forever on fear alone," he said. "Eventually, the wolves need to see that their king is capable of something other than killing. A queen provides that. A treaty provides that. You're a symbol, nothing more. The words were meant to hurt, meant to put her in her place. They worked. Lyra felt the sting of them settle in her chest, cold and sharp. I see, she said quietly. He doesn't mean it, the wolf said, and for the first time his voice had lost its playful edge. He's just afraid. I heard that, Kale snapped. Heard what? Lyra asked. Kale's jaw clenched. The wolf. He broke off, looking furious with himself for even engaging. He said you're afraid, Lyra finished. The silence that followed was brittle. Then Kale laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound, nothing like humor. Of course he did, because he's never learned when to shut up. Because you need to hear it, the wolf shot back. You can't keep everyone at arm's length forever. Not her, not me, not anyone. Watch me. I'm standing right here, Lyra said, her voice sharper than intended. If you're going to have an argument with yourself, at least have the decency to do it when I'm not in the room. Kale's eyes snapped to her, genuinely surprised. Then, impossibly, his mouth twitched. Not a smile, not even close, but something that wasn't entirely a scowl. Oh, I really like her, the wolf said. Shut up, Kale muttered. Lyra crossed her arms. I can hear him too, you know, so when you tell him to shut up, you're also telling me to. I know. Kale ran a hand through his hair, the gesture betraying a frustration he usually kept locked down. This wasn't supposed to happen. What wasn't? The bond. You hearing him? Any of it. He turned back to the window, his hands braced against the stone. Bonds between alphas and their mates are supposed to be instinctual, a connection that lets you fight together, sense danger, protect each other. But it's not supposed to be verbal, Lyra supplied. Invasive. Kale's voice was rough. It's supposed to be a strength, a weapon, not a voice in your head that won't stop making jokes while you're trying to negotiate with warlords. I resent that. My jokes are excellent. Despite everything, Lyra felt a smile tug at her lips. Kyle must have sensed it because he glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. You think this is funny? No, Lyra said honestly. I think it's terrifying, but I also think... She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I think it might be the only reason I'm still alive. Kale frowned. What do you mean? The wine. I wouldn't have known to refuse it if he hadn't warned me. She met his eyes. You saw it too. But you weren't going to act. You were just going to sit there and let it play out. Because reacting would have shown weakness, and dying would have shown strength? Kale's jaw tightened. You don't understand how this court works. Then explain it to me. Why? Because I'm not going to survive here if I don't learn the rules. Lyra took a step closer, her voice firm. And neither are you, apparently. For a long moment, Kyle just stared at her. Then he exhaled, the sound heavy with exhaustion. Marin wants my throne, he said quietly. He's wanted it for years. But he can't take it by force. He doesn't have the strength or the backing. So he's been working on turning the other lords against me. Slowly, carefully, making me look weak, making me look unstable. The rumors about your wolf, Lyra said. Kale nodded. Everyone knows I've suppressed it, that I don't shift, don't hunt, don't do any of the things an alpha is supposed to do. They think I'm broken, that I'm afraid of my own power. Are you? The question hung in the air. Yes, the wolf said softly. Kyle didn't answer. Lyra studied him. This man who ruled through silence and reputation, who had built an entire kingdom on the belief that he was too dangerous to cross. And she saw the truth beneath the mask. He wasn't cold. He was controlled. Every movement, every word, every expression was carefully calculated to project exactly the image he needed. Because underneath it all, he was terrified of what would happen if he let go. What did he do? Lyra asked quietly. Your wolf. What happened that made you lock him away? Nothing, the wolf said, his voice bitter. Absolutely nothing. I never got the chance. Kale's hands clenched into fists. My father was an alpha, he said finally. A real one. He shifted every full moon, hunted with the pack, led the raids himself. He was everything the North respected, everything they feared. And you? I was his heir, which meant I had to be stronger. Had to prove I could control the wolf before it controlled me. Kael's voice was flat, emotionless. So he locked me in the cellars during my first shift, alone. No guidance, no pack, nothing. Just me and the wolf, fighting for dominance. Lyra felt sick. How old were you? 13. He left me down there for 3 days, the wolf added quietly. Told everyone it was tradition. That every alpha had to face their beast alone. I nearly died, Kael continued. The wolf wanted out, wanted to run, to hunt, to be free. But I knew. If I let it take control, I'd never get it back. So I fought, and I won. You didn't win, Lyra said softly. You just trapped him. Kael's eyes snapped to her, sharp and dangerous. But he didn't argue. She's right, the wolf said. You didn't win. You just buried me so deep you forgot I existed. And now, look at us. A king who can't shift and a wolf who can't run. We're both crippled. I did what I had to do, Kael said through gritted teeth. You did what he told you to do. There's a difference. Lyra watched the tension coil through Kael's body, watched him wrestle with something he'd probably never said out loud. If anyone finds out about this, Kael said finally, turning back to her, if anyone learns that you can hear him, that there's a bond between us, they'll use it against us, Lyra finished. You already said that. I need you to understand the stakes. Kael's voice dropped, becoming something cold and final. They'll call you corrupted, possessed. They'll say you're a threat to the throne, that you're using dark magic to control me, and they'll kill you for it. Then we don't tell them, Lyra said, meeting his eyes without flinching. Kael studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Get some sleep, he said, his voice returning to its usual flat monotone. Tomorrow, the real test begins. What happens tomorrow? You meet the rest of the court. The lords who didn't bother coming to the wedding, the ones who want to see if you're worth the grain treaty. His mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if it had any warmth. And they're going to tear you apart. Not if we tear them apart first, the wolf said cheerfully. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine, but she lifted her chin and kept her voice steady. Then I'd better be ready. Kael looked at her for another moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he turned and walked to the chair by the door, settling into it like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Sleep, Lyra, he said quietly. It was the first time he'd used her name. Lyra walked to the bed, her legs shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. She climbed under the furs, still fully dressed, and stared up at the stone ceiling. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, battering against the walls of the fortress. And in her head, the wolf's voice drifted through her thoughts, softer now, almost gentle. You did good tonight, archivist. Don't let him scare you. He's just afraid. Of what? Lyra whispered into the darkness. Of everything, of losing control, of becoming his father, of letting anyone close enough to hurt him. The wolf paused. Of me. Why? Because I'm the part of him that feels things, that wants things, that remembers what it's like to be alive instead of just surviving. His voice grew quieter, and he spent 10 years making sure I never get the chance to remind him. Lyra closed her eyes, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. 3 days ago, she'd been a forgotten daughter in a library, cataloging books no one read. Now she was a queen in a court that wanted her dead, bonded to a king who didn't want to be saved, and sharing headspace with a wolf who apparently had opinions about everything. She should have been terrified. And she was. But underneath the fear, underneath the exhaustion, there was something else. Anger. At her father for selling her, at Kael for treating her like a political prop. At this entire brutal frozen kingdom that ground people down until there was nothing left but survival. She'd spent her whole life being invisible, being useful, being quiet. Maybe it was time to stop. That's the spirit, the wolf murmured approvingly. Welcome to the pack, little queen. And with that, his voice faded, leaving her alone with the sound of the wind and the steady breathing of the king who sat guard at her door. Lyra pulled the furs tighter around herself and let her eyes drift shut. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. But tonight, she'd survived. And that would have to be enough. The sun barely cleared the mountains before the first attack came. Lyra woke to voices outside the chamber door, sharp, angry, demanding entry. She sat up, disoriented, her body still heavy with exhaustion. The furs had slipped off during the night, and the room was freezing. Kael was already on his feet, positioned between her and the door, one hand on the hilt of his sword. "What is it?" Lyra asked, her voice rough. "Company," Kael said flatly. The door crashed open. 3 women swept into the room like a winter storm. They were dressed in fine wool and silver, their hair braided in the northern style, their faces sharp with calculation. The one in front was older, maybe 50, with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes like flint. "So this is the Southern bride," the woman said, her voice dripping with contempt. She looked Lyra up and down, taking in her wrinkled dress, her loose hair, the way she clutched the furs to her chest. "How quaint." "Lady Moira," the wolf supplied, Kael's aunt. She raised him after his mother died, and she hates everyone. Kael's jaw tightened. "You weren't invited. I don't need an invitation to see my nephew's wife." Moira moved closer, circling Lyra like a predator. "Especially when that wife is supposed to secure our future. Tell me, girl, what exactly did your father promise the king in exchange for you?" "Grain shipments and safe passage for the southern caravans," Lyra said, keeping her voice steady. Moira laughed. It was a cold, cutting sound. "Grain! How romantic! And what did you promise him?" "Nothing." "Nothing?" Moira's eyebrows rose. "No heirs, no loyalty, no talents worth mentioning?" "Don't let her bait you," the wolf warned. But Lyra's temper was already fraying. She'd spent her entire life being dismissed, being treated like she was worthless. She wasn't going to start her reign the same way. "I can read," Lyra said quietly. "I know history, treaties, law. I know which alliances held and which ones crumbled. I know the names of every northern house and which ones are drowning in debt." She met Moira's eyes. "I know your house lost 3 trade routes last winter and had to borrow silver from Lord Garrett to pay your soldiers." The room went silent. Moira's face turned to stone. "How dare you?" "It's in the ledgers," Lyra continued, her voice calm. "Public record. Anyone who bothered to look would know. But no one looks, do they? They just assume that because I'm from the South, I'm decorative, useless." "Oh, this is going to be good," the wolf said gleefully. Moira's hand moved toward the knife at her belt. Kael stepped forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Touch her, and I'll have you in chains before you reach the door." The 2 women behind Moira tensed, their hands moving to their own weapons. For a heartbeat, the room balanced on a knife's edge. Then Moira smiled. It was worse than her anger. "My apologies, Your Majesty," she said, the title mocking. "I simply wanted to ensure that our new queen understands the expectations placed upon her. This is not the soft South. Here, weakness is death, and a queen who cannot defend herself is a liability." "Then it's fortunate I can defend myself," Lyra said. Moira's smile widened. "We'll see." She turned and swept out of the room, the other women following like shadows. The door slammed shut behind them. Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. "That was stupid," Kael said. "Excuse me?" Provoking her, showing off. He turned to face her, his expression hard. "You just made yourself a target." "I was already a target," Lyra shot back. "The moment I walked into this fortress, every person in it started calculating how to use me or get rid of me. At least now they know I'm not blind." "She's right," the wolf said. Moira was testing her. If she'd backed down, it would have been worse. Kael's jaw clenched. "You don't understand what you've started." "Then explain it to me." "Like you promised." He stared at her for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes. Then he grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. "Get dressed. The lords are waiting." "For what?" "Your official presentation to the court." His mouth twisted. "Consider it your audition." The throne room was even more intimidating in daylight. The hall stretched the length of the fortress, lined with pillars carved to look like ancient trees. Banners hung from the rafters, each one representing a different house: wolves, bears, ravens, eagles. The floor was polished stone, black as midnight, reflecting the cold morning light that filtered through narrow windows. At the far end, Kael's throne sat on a raised dais, flanked by 2 smaller chairs. One of them was for her. Lyra felt every eye in the room track her as she walked down the center aisle. The lords stood in clusters, their conversations dying as she passed. Servants pressed themselves against the walls, trying to be invisible. She kept her chin up, her steps measured, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Breathe," the wolf said quietly. "They can smell fear." Lyra focused on Kyle's back, on the steady, controlled way he moved. He didn't look at her, didn't slow down, didn't offer any reassurance. She was on her own. They reached the dais. Kyle took his throne without ceremony, his posture rigid, his face a mask. Lyra moved to the smaller chair beside him and sat. The room waited. "You've all met my queen," Kale said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Now you'll swear your oaths to her." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. "Oh, he's making a statement," the wolf said. "This is going to piss them off." Lord Davrick stepped forward first, his expression carefully neutral. He went down on one knee, his hand over his heart. "I pledge my loyalty to the crown," he said, "and to its queen." The words were correct. The tone was skeptical, but he said them. One by one, the other lords came forward. Some were sincere, most were not, but they all bent the knee, all spoke the words, all played the game. Until Lord Marin. He stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on Lyra. His smile was pleasant, his posture relaxed, but there was something cold and predatory in the way he moved. "Your Majesty," he said, not bothering to kneel, "forgive me, but I must speak plainly." "Here we go," the wolf muttered. Kale's hand tightened on the arm of his throne. "Speak. I have concerns about this union." Marin's voice was smooth, reasonable. "The queen is untested, unproven. She has no experience in governance, no understanding of our ways, and yet we are expected to pledge our lives to her?" "The marriage was agreed upon by the council," Kyle said flatly. "With respect, Your Majesty, the council agreed to a political alliance, not to elevating a stranger to a position of power." Marin turned to address the room. "We know nothing about her. Her family has no military strength. Her house has produced no notable leaders. What has she done to earn our loyalty?" The hall went silent. Lyra felt the weight of 100 eyes on her, measuring, judging, waiting to see how she'd respond. "Don't look at Kyle," the wolf warned. "If you look to him for help, you've already lost." She stood. The movement was sudden enough that several lords reached for their weapons. Lyra ignored them. She walked down the steps of the dais, her dress sweeping the stone floor, until she was standing directly in front of Marin. "You want to know what I've done?" she said quietly. Marin's smile never wavered. "I think we all do. I saved your king's life last night, at the feast, when you tried to poison him." The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Marin's expression didn't change, but she saw the flicker of rage in his eyes. "That's a serious charge, Your Majesty. Do you have proof?" "The cup is still in the hall. Have it tested. Wine spoils. Any test now would be inconclusive." Marin spread his hands, his voice turning patronizing. "I understand you're new to court politics. Perhaps you misunderstood what you saw. It's easy to imagine threats when you're in unfamiliar territory." "He's good," the wolf admitted. "He's making her look paranoid." Several lords were nodding. Lyra could see it, the narrative shifting, turning her into the hysterical southern bride who saw assassins in every shadow. "You're right," Lyra said. "I am new to court politics, but I'm not new to research, to evidence, to finding the truth in records everyone else overlooks." She turned to face the room. "Lord Marin controls the western silver mines. Or he did, until production dropped 30% last year. He blamed it on a collapsed tunnel. But the mine inspectors found no structural damage. What they did find were signs of smuggling, ore being moved out through secondary tunnels and sold directly to southern merchants, bypassing the crown's taxes entirely." Marin's face went pale. "That's documented," Lyra continued, "in the inspection reports filed with the Royal Archives, the ones no one bothered to read because Lord Marine assured the council that everything was being handled internally." She looked back at him. "You've been stealing from the crown for over a year, using the profits to buy loyalty, to position yourself for a move against the throne." The hall erupted. Lords shouted over each other, some demanding proof, others calling for Marin's arrest. The chaos was immediate, visceral. Marin's hand moved to his sword. Kale was on his feet in an instant, his voice cutting through the noise like a whip crack. "Guards! 6 armed men materialized from the shadows, surrounding Marin. "You have no proof," Marin snarled, his composure finally cracking. "Just the word of a southern girl who's been here less than a day." "The archives are public record," Lyra said. "Anyone can verify what I've said, but you already know it's true. That's why you tried to kill the king, because you knew he'd eventually find out, and you needed him dead before he could act." Marin's eyes blazed with hatred. "You little—" "Take him to the cells," Kale ordered. "We'll review the archives. If the Queen's accusations are accurate, he'll stand trial. If not—" His eyes found Lyra's, cold and assessing. "Then we'll discuss the consequences of making false charges." The guards seized Marin, dragging him toward the doors. He fought, shouting threats and curses, but they hauled him out anyway. The hall fell silent again. Every lord in the room was staring at Lyra. She walked back to the dais, her legs shaking, and sat down. Kael's expression was unreadable. "Well," the wolf said into the silence, "that happened." The council meeting that followed was brutal. Lyra sat beside Kael at a long table, facing a dozen of the most powerful lords in the kingdom. They all had questions, demands, accusations thinly veiled as concerns. "How did you know about the mine inspections?" Lord Garrett asked, his voice suspicious. "I read the archives before I left the South," Lyra said. "My father wanted to ensure I understood the kingdom I was marrying into. I spent 3 days reviewing trade records, inspection reports, and financial statements." It was a lie. She'd actually found the information in Kael's own study that morning while he'd been meeting with his steward. The documents had been buried under a stack of correspondence, marked for review but clearly never read. "Nice," the wolf approved. "Quick thinking. And you just happened to remember details about a single mine inspection?" Davrick pressed. "I remember everything I read," Lyra said. "It's how I was trained." That part, at least, was true. Lady Moira leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Convenient. A perfect memory, an eye for detail. And an accusation made at the exact moment someone challenged your authority. Tell me, Your Majesty, did you plan this? Did you research Lord Marin specifically, looking for leverage?" "No," Lyra said. "Then how—" "I researched all of you." Lyra met her gaze steadily. "Every lord, every house, every financial record I could find. Because I knew coming here meant walking into a viper's nest, and I had no intention of being bitten without knowing which snakes to watch." The table went silent. "Oh, she's scared them now," the wolf said with satisfaction. Kael's hand moved slightly on the table, a gesture so small Lyra almost missed it. But it was there. A warning. She'd pushed too far. "Knowledge is useful," Kael said, his voice flat. "But accusations require evidence. If the inspection reports support the Queen's claims, Marin will face consequences. If not, this conversation is over." He stood, ending the meeting without waiting for a response. The lords filed out slowly, their expressions ranging from thoughtful to hostile. When the door finally closed, Lyra let out a breath. "That was reckless," Kael interrupted. He turned on her, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking that if I didn't establish myself immediately, they'd spend the next 6 months testing me, probing for weakness, trying to get rid of me." "So you decided to accuse one of the most powerful lords in the kingdom of treason. He tried to poison you, and now he has a reason to come after you directly." Hale stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Do you understand what you've done? If those reports don't back up your claims, you'll look like a liar, a schemer, and they'll have cause to remove you." "The reports are real," Lyra said. "I saw them in your study." Kael froze. "You went through my study? I needed information. You weren't going to give it to me." "Technically true," the wolf offered. "That doesn't give you the right to—" "What was I supposed to do?" Lyra demanded. "Sit quietly while your court tore me apart? Smile and nod while they decided whether I was worth keeping alive?" Her voice rose. "You brought me here. You made me queen. But you haven't given me anything. No allies, no information, no protection. So yes, I went through your study. I read your reports. I learned everything I could because that's the only weapon I have." Kael stared at her, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Then he turned away, his hands braced on the table. "You're right," he said quietly. Lyra blinked. What? You're right. I brought you here. I expected you to survive on your own, to figure it out. He exhaled slowly. That was unfair. Did he just apologize? The wolf sounded shocked. Mark this day. It'll never happen again. I don't need an apology, Lyra said. I need help. Information. Something to work with. Kael nodded slowly. The reports are in the archive vault. Second level, east wing. I'll have someone show you. No, Lyra shook her head. If someone shows me, everyone will know I'm looking. I need to go alone. She's learning, the wolf said approvingly. Kael studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled a key from his pocket and set it on the table. The vault locks at sunset. Don't get caught. Lyra picked up the key, the metal cold against her palm. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Kael's expression was grim. If you're wrong about Marin, this will destroy you, and I won't be able to protect you. I'm not wrong. You'd better not be. The archive vault was freezing. Lyra wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders as she descended the narrow stone steps, the torch in her hand casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air smelled of old parchment and mildew, and somewhere in the darkness she could hear water dripping. Charming, the wolf muttered. Nothing says royal archive like potential flooding. Be helpful or be quiet, Lyra whispered. I'm always helpful. The vault door was iron, reinforced with bands of steel. Lyra fitted the key into the lock, her hands numb from the cold, and pushed. The door swung open with a groan. Inside, the archives stretched into darkness, rows upon rows of shelves packed with documents, ledgers, maps, and records going back centuries. The sheer volume of it was overwhelming. Lyra took a breath and started searching. She found the mine inspection reports within an hour, buried in a section labeled Infrastructure, Western Territories. The documents were exactly as she'd remembered, detailed reports of ore production, tunnel integrity, and suspicious discrepancies in shipment records. But there was more. Hidden beneath the official reports were letters. Correspondence between Marin and someone identified only as K. The letters discussed payments, shipments, and plans to destabilize the throne. Lyra's hands shook as she read. This is big, the wolf said quietly. This isn't just embezzlement. This is conspiracy. Who is K? Lyra muttered, scanning the letters for clues. Someone with access to the crown's finances, someone close to Kael. A sound echoed through the vault. Footsteps. Lyra froze, her heart hammering. Someone was coming. She grabbed the letters, shoving them inside her cloak, and doused the torch. The vault plunged into darkness. The footsteps grew closer. Hide, the wolf urged. Lyra pressed herself against the shelves, trying to control her breathing. The door creaked open. A figure stepped into the vault, carrying a lantern. The light cast harsh shadows across a familiar face. Lady Moira. Lyra's breath caught. Moira moved through the vault with practiced ease, heading straight for the section where Lyra had been searching. She pulled a key from her pocket and unlocked a drawer Lyra hadn't noticed, removing a stack of documents. Then she paused. I know you're here, Moira said quietly. Lyra didn't move, didn't breathe. Moira turned, the lantern light sweeping across the shelves. I can smell the smoke from your torch. You're not as clever as you think, girl. Run, the wolf said, but there was nowhere to go. The only exit was behind Moira. Lyra stepped out of the shadows. Moira's eyes narrowed. Snooping already? You work fast. I was looking for evidence, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. And did you find it? Lyra's hand moved to the letters hidden in her cloak. Yes. Moira smiled. It was the coldest thing Lyra had ever seen. Good, she said. Then you understand what you're up against. She set the lantern down and drew a knife. Lyra backed away, her mind racing. She had no weapon, no way to call for help. The vault was soundproof, designed to protect the archives from fire and flood. No one would hear her scream. Use me, the wolf said urgently. The bond. You can feel what Kael feels. Push it. Call to him. I don't know how. Talking to yourself? Moira advanced, the knife glinting in the lantern light. They said you were touched. Mad. I should have believed them. Lyra's back hit the wall. She closed her eyes and reached for the bond, That strange connection she didn't understand. She pictured Kyle, imagined his presence, his strength, and pushed every ounce of fear and desperation she felt through that invisible thread. Help. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she felt it. A surge of awareness, of recognition, of rage so violent it nearly knocked her off her feet. Somewhere in the fortress, Kyle felt her terror. And he was coming. "He won't get here in time," Moira said, reading her expression. "Whatever you think you found, whatever you think you know, it dies here." She lunged. Lyra threw herself sideways, hitting the shelves hard. Documents rained down around her. She grabbed a heavy ledger and swung it like a club. Moira dodged, laughing. Pathetic. The knife flashed. Pain exploded across Lyra's arm. She stumbled, blood soaking through her sleeve. Moira raised the knife again. The vault door exploded inward. Kale stood in the doorway, his eyes blazing with something that wasn't entirely human. His wolf was there, just beneath the surface, making his movements too fast, too fluid. Moira spun, raising the knife. She never got the chance to use it. Kyle moved like liquid shadow, crossing the distance in a heartbeat. He caught Moira's wrist, twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor, then slammed her against the wall hard enough to crack the stone. "Give me one reason," he said, his voice barely recognizable. "Why I shouldn't kill you right now." Moira smiled through the blood on her lips. "Because I'm family." "Not anymore." He threw her toward the door where guards had appeared, their faces shocked. "Take her to the cells," Kyle ordered. "Next to Marin. They can keep each other company." As the guards dragged Moira away, Kale turned to Lyra. His eyes were still wrong, still wild. "You're hurt," he said. "It's not deep." Lyra pressed her hand against the cut, trying to stop the bleeding. "The letters. I found letters. Marin wasn't working alone." "I know." Kale's voice was rough. "I felt you. In my head. Your fear. I've never—" He broke off, shaking his head. "We need to get you out of here." He picked up the lantern and guided her toward the door, his hand gentle on her uninjured arm. "That was close," the wolf said quietly. "Too close." "The letters," Lyra said again. "Kyle, they prove Later." His jaw was set, his eyes still burning with that inhuman light. "Right now, we're getting you somewhere safe." "Where?" Lyra asked. "If Moira was involved, if there's a conspiracy, then nowhere is safe." Kale met her eyes. "Which means you're going to have to learn to fight." The training yard was frozen solid, the ground hard as iron beneath Lyra's boots. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but Kyle had dragged her out of bed anyway, shoving a practice sword into her hands before she'd fully opened her eyes. "Again," he said. Lyra raised the wooden blade, her arms screaming in protest. They'd been at this for 2 hours. Her hands were blistered, her shoulders burning, and she still couldn't land a single hit. She lunged. Kale sidestepped effortlessly and swept her legs out from under her. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. "You're telegraphing," he said. "Your eyes move before your body does. Any half-trained soldier will see it coming." "He's not wrong," the wolf offered. "You fight like someone who's only ever seen combat in books." "Because that's exactly what I am," Lyra gasped, pushing herself upright. Her wounded arm throbbed where Moira's knife had caught her. The healer had stitched it closed, but every movement pulled at the fresh scars. Kyle's expression didn't soften. "Then you'll die. Probably within the week. Thanks for the encouragement." "I'm not here to encourage you. I'm here to keep you alive." He tossed her the sword again. "Up." Lyra caught it, her hands numb. The sky was starting to lighten at the edges, turning the black clouds purple. Around the edges of the yard, she could see figures gathering. Soldiers, servants, lords who'd come to watch the Southern Queen make a fool of herself. "They're betting on how long you'll last," the wolf said. "Current odds are 3 days." "3 days until what?" "Until someone makes another attempt on your life," Kale said, apparently hearing the question despite her having whispered it. "Moira and Marin are in the cells, but whoever they were working with is still out there. And now that you've exposed part of the conspiracy, you're a direct threat." He moved so fast she barely saw him. The practice sword cracked against her ribs, and she stumbled sideways. "Focus!" Kyle snapped. "In a real fight, That would have been a knife in your lung. Lyra gritted her teeth and raised the sword again. This time, when he attacked, she didn't try to block. She dropped low, rolling under his swing, and came up behind him. For half a second, she thought she'd actually done it. Then Kael spun, catching her sword arm and twisting. She hit the ground again, this time with him on top of her, one hand at her throat. Better, he said, but not good enough. His face was inches from hers, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, close enough to feel the heat of him despite the freezing air. Well, this is cozy, the wolf said, sounding amused. Kael's eyes narrowed. Shut up. I didn't say anything, Lyra managed. Not you. He stood, pulling her up with him. Again. They went until the sun cleared the mountains. By then, Lyra could barely lift the sword. Her entire body was one massive bruise, her lungs burning from the cold air. Enough, Kael said finally. Lyra dropped the sword and fell to her knees, gasping. Around the yard, the watching crowd dispersed, their expressions ranging from disappointed to contemptuous. She'd given them a show, but not the kind they'd wanted. They expected you to cry, the wolf said. Or quit. You didn't. That counts for something. Kael handed her a water skin. You're slow, weak. Your form is terrible and your instincts are wrong. Is there a compliment coming, or... But you didn't give up. He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Most people would have. Lyra took a long drink, her hands shaking. Most people haven't spent 2 days discovering that half the court wants them dead. Fair point. Kael sat down beside her, which was so unexpected that Lyra nearly choked on the water. The letters you found, they mentioned payments. Did you see any names besides K? No, just references to the transaction and the agreement. Lyra wiped her mouth. But there were dates. The payments started 6 months ago, right after the grain treaty negotiations began. Kael's jaw tightened. Someone knew about the marriage before it was announced. Which means the leak came from inside your council. Or from your father's court. Lyra considered that. My father barely noticed I existed. I don't think he'd bother conspiring about me. Unless he was paid to, the wolf said darkly. The thought made her sick. But it wasn't impossible. Edmund Vale had sold her for grain and safe passage. Who's to say he hadn't made side deals? We need to find out who Kay is, Lyra said. We will. But right now, we have a bigger problem. Kael stood, offering her his hand. The winter feast is tonight. Every lord in the kingdom will be there, including the ones who want you dead. Can't we cancel it? And show fear? No. He pulled her to her feet. You wanted to be queen. This is what that means. You stand in front of people who hate you, and you don't flinch. The feast was worse than the wedding. The great hall had been transformed, draped in black and silver, torches blazing in every corner. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meat, winter vegetables, and dark wine that looked like blood in the firelight. Every seat was filled. Lyra sat beside Kael at the high table, wearing a dress that felt like armor. The fabric was northern style, thick wool dyed deep blue, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that looked like frost. It was beautiful. It was also suffocating. Smile, Kael murmured without looking at her. Lyra forced her lips into something that might pass for pleasant. Below them the lords feasted and laughed and made toasts that sounded like threats. Lyra recognized most of them now. Lord Garrett, who was probably embezzling. Lord Davrick, who controlled the eastern passes. Lady Thorne, who'd allegedly poisoned 2 husbands. And scattered throughout the crowd, faces she didn't recognize. Men and women who'd traveled from the far reaches of the kingdom to see the new queen, to judge whether she was worth keeping. You're doing fine, the wolf said. Just keep breathing. Easy for you to say, Lyra whispered. Kael's hand moved under the table, brushing against hers. The touch was brief, but deliberate. A warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell which. The first course arrived. Roasted boar, still steaming, its glazed skin cracking under the carving knife. Lyra's stomach turned. She hadn't eaten all day, too nervous to keep anything down, and the smell of the meat made her nauseated. You need to eat, Kael said quietly. I can't. You will, or they'll think you're afraid.
I am afraid. His fingers brushed hers again, more firmly this time. I know. Eat anyway. Lyra forced herself to take a bite. The meat was rich, heavy, seasoned with herbs she didn't recognize. She chewed mechanically, swallowed, and reached for her wine. The goblet was already full. She froze, her hand hovering over the cup. Don't, the wolf said sharply. Lyra pulled her hand back. Across the table, Lord Garrett was watching her, a small smile playing at his lips. Not thirsty, Your Majesty? He asked. I prefer water, Lyra said. How modest. His smile widened. Though I've heard southern tastes run differently than ours, perhaps the wine is too strong for you. It was a challenge, a test. Everyone at the high table was watching now, waiting to see how she'd respond. Lyra picked up the goblet and held it out to a servant. Bring me water, and have this wine tested before anyone else drinks it. The hall went silent. Garrett's smile vanished. You're accusing me. I'm being cautious, Lyra interrupted. Someone tried to poison the king at our wedding feast. I'd rather not repeat the experience. That was Lord Marine, Garrett said, his voice tight, who is currently in chains, and who is working with accomplices who are still free. Lyra met his eyes. Unless you'd like to drink it first? To prove there's nothing wrong? Garrett's face flushed dark red. Gotcha, the wolf said gleefully. Kale didn't move, didn't speak, but Lyra could feel his tension like a coiled spring. A servant hurried forward and took the goblet, disappearing into the crowd. The silence stretched, then Garrett stood abruptly. I will not sit here and be insulted by a girl who's been queen for less than a week. Then leave, Lyra said. The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Garrett stared at her, his jaw working. For a moment, she thought he might actually draw his sword, might challenge her right there in the middle of the feast. Instead, he turned and stormed out. Half a dozen lords followed him. The hall erupted into whispered conversation, speculation spreading like wildfire. Kyle leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. That was reckless. That was necessary, Lyra whispered back. He was testing me. If I'd backed down, you just split the court. Half of them will see strength. The other half will see a paranoid outsider destroying alliances. Good. Let them pick sides. At least then we'll know who's loyal. She's got a point, the wolf said. Kale's hand found hers under the table again, gripping hard enough to hurt. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm playing the only game I can. The servant returned, his face pale. He leaned down and whispered in Kyle's ear. Kale's expression didn't change, but his grip on Lyra's hand tightened. What? She asked. Nightshade, Kale said quietly. Enough to kill within minutes. The room seemed to tilt. Someone had just tried to murder her. Again. In front of the entire court. And Garrett knew, the wolf snarled. Did you see his face when you asked him to drink? He knew exactly what was in that cup. Lyra's hands started to shake. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to control the trembling. We're leaving, Kale said, standing. No. Lyra forced herself to stay seated. If we leave now, it looks like retreat, like fear. You were nearly poisoned. And I wasn't, because I didn't drink. She lifted her chin, her voice carrying across the hall. It seems my caution was warranted. The wine was poisoned. Someone in this hall just attempted murder. The whispers turned to shouts. Lords were on their feet now, some demanding answers, others calling for the guards. The chaos was immediate and absolute. And through it all, Lyra sat perfectly still, her hands steady, her face calm. Even though inside she was screaming. You're doing great, the wolf said. Don't pass out. That would ruin the effect. Kale raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. Whoever is responsible, he said, his voice cold enough to freeze blood, has 3 days to confess. After that, I will assume the entire court is complicit, and I will act accordingly. It was a threat and a promise. The feast ended shortly after. Lords and ladies fled the hall like rats from a sinking ship, their faces pale, their conversations urgent. Lyra waited until the last of them had gone before she allowed herself to collapse back in her chair. I think I'm going to be sick, she whispered. Not here. Kyle pulled her to her feet. Not where they can see. He half carried her back to their chambers,
his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. The corridors were empty, the fortress eerily quiet after the chaos of the feast. The moment the door closed behind them, Lyra stumbled to the window and vomited. "Okay, that's fair," the wolf said. "That was a lot." Kale brought her water in a cloth, his movements efficient and impersonal. "Twice," Lyra gasped when she could speak again. "Someone's tried to kill me twice in 4 days." 3 times if you count Moira with the knife. Not helping. Kale sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked exhausted, defeated. "I can't protect you," he said quietly. Lyra turned from the window. "What?" "I can't protect you. Not from this. There are too many of them, and I don't know who to trust." He looked up at her, and the raw honesty in his eyes was almost painful. "You were right. I brought you here. I made you a target, and I have no idea how to keep you alive." "Tell him," the wolf urged, "about the bond, about what you felt in the vault." "We have the bond," Lyra said. "The bond won't stop a knife. No, but it might warn us before the knife gets close." She sat down beside him, her body aching. "In the vault, when Moira attacked, I called to you, and you felt it. You came." Kale nodded slowly. "I've never felt anything like that. It was like drowning," Lyra finished. "Like someone was pulling me under and I couldn't breathe." "Yes." He looked at her. "How did you do it?" "I don't know. I just focused on you, on needing help. And it worked." "The bond is stronger than either of you realize," the wolf said. "Most alpha pairs take years to develop that kind of connection. You two did it in days." "Is that normal?" Lyra asked. "Nothing about this is normal," Kyle said, but there was something almost like wonder in his voice. "But if we can use it, if we can learn to communicate without words, then we have an advantage no one else knows about," Lyra finished. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling over them. Then Kyle stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we interrogate Marin and Moira. Someone knows who Kay is, and we're going to find out." Cheb. The cells beneath the fortress were worse than the archives. The air was damp and freezing, smelling of mold and human waste. Torches flickered in iron brackets, throwing more shadow than light. Marin was in the first cell, chained to the wall. He looked up as they approached, his face gaunt but his eyes still burning with hatred. "Come to gloat?" he asked. "We came for answers," Kyle said. "Then you're going to be disappointed." Lyra stepped forward, ignoring the way her skin crawled at the sight of him. "Who is Kay? Who were you working with?" Marin laughed. It was a broken, ugly sound. "You think I'm going to tell you? You think anything you can do to me is worse than what they'll do if I talk?" "They're not here," Lyra said. "We are. For now." Marin's eyes found hers. "But you won't last, little queen. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet." Kale's hand moved to his sword. "Don't," the wolf warned. "He wants you to lose control. That's the game." Lyra put her hand on Kyle's arm, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. "Let's try Moira," she said quietly. They moved to the next cell. Moira sat in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, perfectly composed despite the chains and the filth. She looked up as they approached, a small smile on her lips. "Nephew," she said. "And the little archivist, how domestic." "You tried to kill her," Kyle said, his voice flat. "I tried to protect you. There's a difference." Moira stood, the chains rattling. "That girl is going to destroy everything you've built, everything your father built. She's weak, an outsider, a liability. She's my wife. She's a mistake." Moira's eyes shifted to Lyra. "You don't belong here. You never will. And the longer you stay, the more people will die trying to remove you." "Who else is involved?" Lyra asked. "Who's Kay?" Moira's smile widened. "Oh, you found the letters. How clever. But you're asking the wrong questions, girl." "What's the right question?" "Why did your father really send you here?" Moira leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because it wasn't for a grain treaty. It was because someone paid him very well to deliver you straight into a trap." Lyra's blood went cold. "You're lying," she said. "Am I?" "Ask yourself, why you? Your father had 3 daughters. 2 of them are beautiful, charming, bred for political marriages. But he sent you, the bookish one, the one no one wanted. Moira's eyes glittered. Because someone specifically requested you, and your father was more than happy to hand you over. Who? Kyle demanded. Now that would be telling. Moira sat back down. But I'll give you a hint. They're closer than you think, and they've been planning this for a very long time. She closed her eyes, clearly done with the conversation. Cale grabbed the cell bars, his knuckles white. Tell me. Leave it, Lyra said, her voice hollow. She's not going to say anything else. They walked back through the cells in silence. When they reached the stairs, Lyra stopped, leaning against the stone wall. Her mind was spinning, Moira's words echoing in her head. She could be lying, Cale said. She could be, Lyra agreed. But what if she's not? What if my father… She couldn't finish the sentence. It would explain a lot, the wolf said quietly. Why he was so eager to marry you off. Why he didn't even try to negotiate better terms. We need to send a message to the south, Kyle said. Find out if there were any unusual transactions around the time of the treaty. And if there were, then we'll know who to start hunting. They climbed the stairs, emerging into the cold morning light. A soldier was waiting at the top, his face pale. Your Majesty, he said, out of breath. There's been an attack on the eastern border. Lord Garrett's forces have seized the pass. Kyle went very still. When? 2 hours ago. They've cut off the trade routes. Nothing's getting through. That son of a… The wolf snarled. How many men? Cale asked. 200, maybe more. The soldier swallowed. He's calling it a defensive measure. Says he's protecting his territory from the Queen's influence. Lyra felt like she'd been punched. He's using me as an excuse to rebel. He's using you as a rallying point, Kyle corrected. This isn't about you. It's about destabilizing the throne, about forcing me to choose between my wife and my kingdom. Then send me away, Lyra said immediately. If my presence is causing No. The word was absolute. Kyle turned to the soldier. Gather the council. We ride in 2 hours. You're going to fight him? Lyra asked. I'm going to end this. Before it spreads. He looked at her, his eyes hard. You're staying here, behind the fortress walls, where it's safe. Safe? Someone just tried to poison me at dinner, which is exactly why you're not coming to a battlefield. He started walking, his strides long and purposeful. I'll leave half the garrison here. They'll guard you. Keep you alive until I get back. Lyra followed him, her mind racing. And if you don't get back? He didn't answer. They reached the war room where maps were already being spread across the table. Lords were gathering, their faces grim. Kyle immediately began issuing orders, troop movements, supply lines, tactical positions. His voice was sharp, commanding, every inch the warrior king. Lyra stood at the edge of the room, watching him work. And slowly, a terrible realization settled over her. This was what they wanted. Whoever Kay was, whoever was pulling the strings, they wanted KL out of the fortress, away from the seat of power, distracted by a conflict he couldn't ignore, which meant the real attack was coming here. You're thinking it too, the wolf said quietly. This is a trap. Kyle, Lyra said. He didn't look up from the maps. Not now. Kyle, this is a diversion. That got his attention. He looked up, his eyes sharp. What? Garrett's rebellion. It's not the real threat. It's designed to pull you away from the fortress, to leave me exposed. She stepped closer to the table. Think about it. The timing is too perfect. Right after the poisoning fails. Right after we start asking questions about Kay. Someone wants you gone. And they're using Garrett to make it happen. The room went silent. Lord Davrick shook his head. That's paranoid. Garrett's rebellion is real. He has 200 men in control of a strategic pass. We can't just ignore it. I'm not saying ignore it, Lyra said. I'm saying don't take the whole army. Send a force large enough to handle Garrett, but keep enough here to defend the fortress. From what? Another lord demanded. There's no army at our gates. Not yet. Cale stared at her, his jaw tight. She could see him weighing the options, calculating the risks. She's right, the wolf said. And you know it. We split the forces, Cale said finally. Lord Davrick, you take half the men and deal with Garrett. I stay here. Your Majesty, Davrick started to protest. That's the decision. Cale's voice was ice. If this is a trap, I'm not leaving the fortress undefended, and if it's not, you're more than capable of handling Garrett on your own. Davrick's jaw clenched, but he nodded. The council dispersed, lords hurrying off to prepare their men. Cale turned to Lyra. If you're wrong about this, I'm not. How can you be sure? Because it's what I would do. Lyra met his eyes. If I wanted to destroy a king, I wouldn't attack him head on. I'd separate him from his allies, his resources, his queen. I'd make him choose between protecting his kingdom and protecting what matters most. And then, when he was weakest, I'd strike. Smart girl, the wolf murmured. Kael's expression was unreadable. You think like a strategist. I think like someone who's spent her whole life being underestimated, who's learned to see the moves people make when they think no one's watching. For a long moment, Kael just looked at her. Then he nodded. We prepare for siege. No one gets in or out until this is over. The attack came at midnight. Lyra was in the archives again, searching through financial records, when she felt it. A surge of alarm through the bond, sharp and urgent. We're under attack, the wolf said. She ran. The corridors were chaos. Soldiers rushing toward the walls, servants fleeing deeper into the fortress, the sounds of shouting and steel on steel echoing off the stone. Lyra burst into the courtyard and froze. The main gate was on fire. Men in unmarked armor poured through the breach, cutting down the guards. The defenders were fighting back, but they were outnumbered, overwhelmed. Lyra searched the chaos for Kael and found him on the wall, his sword already bloody, fighting like something inhuman. His movements were too fast, too fluid. The wolf was there, just beneath the surface, lending him speed and strength. But even that wasn't enough. There were too many of them. This is it, the wolf said grimly. This is the real attack. Lyra's mind raced. The fortress had defenses, oil to pour on attackers, archers on the walls, reinforced gates. But the fire had destroyed their primary entrance, and the enemy was already inside. They needed to fall back, regroup, hold the inner keep. But Kael wasn't falling back. He was standing his ground, refusing to yield an inch, his pride and his rage keeping him locked in a fight he couldn't win. He's going to get himself killed, the wolf snarled. Someone has to do something. Lyra ran toward the wall, grabbing a fallen soldier's horn. She raised it to her lips and blew, 3 short blasts, the signal for retreat to the inner keep. Soldiers hesitated, looking between the horn and their king. Kael's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing with fury. And in that moment of distraction, an enemy soldier's sword cut across his ribs. Kael stumbled. Lyra screamed. The bond exploded with pain, with rage, with the wolf's howl of fury. And then Kael did something she'd never seen before. He shifted. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. His eyes blazed gold, his movements becoming bestial, and when he roared, it was the sound of something that had been caged for too long finally breaking free. He tore through the enemy soldiers like they were paper. But it wasn't enough to turn the tide. Lyra made her decision. She cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted across the battlefield, her voice cutting through the chaos. Listen to the wolf! Every head turned toward her. Kael froze, his eyes finding hers across the distance. And Lyra pushed everything she had through the bond, all her fear, all her desperation, all her absolute certainty that the only way they survived this was if he stopped fighting his own instincts and let the wolf guide him. Tell him, she urged the wolf. Tell him how to win. The wolf didn't hesitate. Through their shared connection, Lyra felt it, the tactical assessment, the weak points in the enemy formation, the precise movements needed to collapse their advance, and she shouted it all. Northeast corner! Their flank is exposed! Pincer movement! Drive them toward the gate! The soldiers stared at her like she'd lost her mind. But Kael heard her. More than that, he understood. He bellowed orders, his voice carrying over the battlefield, and the defenders moved as one. The precise tactical maneuver she'd described, executed with brutal efficiency. The enemy formation wavered. Kael pressed the advantage, his sword a blur, the wolf's instincts guiding every strike. And slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. But as Lyra watched from the courtyard, her heart hammering in her chest, She knew exactly what she'd done. She'd exposed their secret. Everyone had heard her. Everyone had seen her somehow knowing tactical information she shouldn't have. Information that could only have come from one source, the wolf. And now the entire fortress knew that their queen could hear the voice in the Alpha King's head, which meant she'd just painted an even bigger target on both of them. The battle raged on, but Lyra couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She'd saved Kael's life, and she might have just doomed them both. The battle ended at dawn. Lyra stood in the courtyard surrounded by bodies, her hands covered in blood that wasn't hers. The fortress gates were shattered, smoke rising from a dozen fires, and the air reeked of death and burning wood. They'd won. Barely. The enemy had retreated after Kael's forces executed the pincer movement, their formation collapsing under the coordinated assault. But the cost had been brutal. 40 soldiers dead, twice that number wounded, and the fortress walls were breached in 3 places. Kael stood near the ruined gate, his sword still in his hand, his chest heaving. Blood streaked his face and armor, some of it his own from the wound across his ribs. But he was alive. The wolf had saved him, and everyone knew it. The surviving soldiers were gathering in clusters, their voices low, their eyes darting between their king and their queen. Lyra could feel their stares like physical weight. Speculation, fear, wonder. "You really did it," the wolf said quietly. "You told the whole fortress our secret." "I didn't have a choice," Lyra whispered. "I know. Doesn't mean they're going to understand." A soldier approached, his face pale beneath the grime. "Your Majesty, the prisoners." Kael turned. "How many?" 15. "They're in the courtyard, waiting for judgment." Kael's expression was carved from ice. "Execute them." "Wait," Lyra said. Every eye turned to her. She walked toward Kael, her legs unsteady, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. "We need to question them first, find out who sent them." "We know who sent them," Kael said flatly. "Whoever K is, whoever's been orchestrating this from the beginning. Then one of these men might know their identity." Lyra met his eyes. "If we kill them now, we lose that information." Kael's jaw tightened. "They attacked my fortress, killed my men. They don't deserve mercy. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking for answers." "She's right," the wolf said. "As much as I'd enjoy watching them bleed." Kael's hand clenched around his sword hilt. For a moment, Lyra thought he'd refuse, that his rage and his pride would override everything else. Then he nodded curtly. "You have 1 hour. After that, they die anyway." The prisoners were chained in a line against the courtyard wall, all of them wearing the same unmarked armor. They looked like professional soldiers, well-fed, well-trained, nothing like the desperate mercenaries you'd expect from a hastily assembled attack force. Someone had paid good money for this assault. Lyra walked down the line slowly, studying each face. Most of them stared straight ahead, refusing to meet her eyes. A few looked defiant. One was crying. She stopped in front of the youngest, a boy who couldn't be more than 18, his face pale with terror. "What's your name?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "Finn, Your Majesty." "Who hired you, Finn?" "I don't know, I swear. We were just told to follow orders, to breach the gate and hold it open for—" He stopped, his eyes widening. "For who?" Lyra pressed. Finn's gaze darted to the soldier beside him, a thick-necked man with a scar across his throat. The man's eyes promised death. "He's scared of that one," the wolf observed. "More scared of him than of you, which means that's the leader." Lyra moved to stand in front of the scarred soldier. He was older, maybe 40, with the cold, flat eyes of a man who'd killed without hesitation. "You're in command," she said. He smiled. It was a terrible expression. "Was. Who paid you?" "Wouldn't you like to know?" Lyra felt Kael move up behind her, his presence solid and dangerous. "Answer her," Kael said quietly. The soldier's smile widened. "Or what? You'll kill me? I'm already dead, we all are. The moment we failed, we became liabilities." "Then you have nothing to lose by talking," Lyra said. "Don't I?" The soldier leaned forward as far as his chains would allow. "You think this is over? You think stopping one attack means you've won? This was just the opening move, little queen. The real game hasn't even started." Kael's hand moved to his sword. "Don't!" the wolf warned. He's trying to provoke you, make you lose control in front of everyone. But Lyra saw something else. In the soldier's eyes, beneath the bravado, there was genuine fear, not of death, of something worse. You're afraid of them, she said. Whoever hired you. You're more afraid of what they'll do to you than anything we can do. The soldier's smile faltered, just for a second. They have your family, Lyra continued, reading his face like a book. Don't they? That's why you took this job. Not for money, for leverage. The soldier's expression went blank, carefully controlled, but she'd struck a nerve. Where are they? Lyra asked gently. Your family, where are they being held? You can't help them. Maybe not. But I can try. She crouched down so they were eye level. You're right. This attack was just the beginning, which means more people are going to die. More families are going to be torn apart, unless we stop whoever's behind this. The soldier's jaw worked. You don't understand what you're up against. Then explain it to me. For a long moment, he just stared at her, weighing his options, calculating whether she was telling the truth or just manipulating him. Then he exhaled slowly. The north. 3 days' ride from here. There's an old mining settlement abandoned years ago. That's where they're keeping the families of everyone who took this job. How many? 20, maybe more. His voice cracked. My daughter is 8 years old. I haven't seen her in 6 months. Lyra felt something twist in her chest. Who's holding them? I don't know names, just that they're well-funded, well-organized, and they've been planning this for longer than any of us realized. He's telling the truth, the wolf said. I can hear his heartbeat. It's steady, no deception. Lyra stood and turned to Kael. We need to send a rescue party. No, Kael said immediately. They're hostages. They're leverage, bait. His eyes were hard. The moment we send soldiers north, we weaken our defenses here, which is exactly what they want. So we just leave them? We can't save everyone, Kael said flatly. Not without getting more people killed. Lyra wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him that leaving innocent people to die made them no better than the enemy. But she could see the calculation in his eyes, the cold military logic that had kept him alive this long. He wasn't wrong, but that didn't make it right. There might be another way, the wolf said thoughtfully. What? Lyra asked aloud. Kael's eyes narrowed. You're talking to him. Yes. There was no point denying it now. Everyone had already heard her shouting tactical commands she shouldn't have known. He has an idea. The courtyard had gone silent again. Every soldier, every servant, everyone within earshot was watching them with a mixture of fear and fascination. Share it, Kael said. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the bond, on the wolf's presence in her mind. The idea crystallized, audacious, dangerous, but possible. We don't send soldiers, she said, opening her eyes. We send me. The courtyard erupted. Absolutely not, Kael said, his voice cutting through the noise. Listen. No, you're not trained. You're not a soldier. You'd be killed before you made it halfway there. Which is exactly why they won't expect it, Lyra argued. Everyone knows I'm the Southern bride, weak, helpless. No one's going to be watching for a rescue attempt from me. Because it would be suicide. It would be if she went alone, the wolf said. But she won't be. Kael went very still. What are you suggesting? You come with me, Lyra said. Just us. Small, fast, impossible to track. We free the hostages, we find out who's running the operation, and we get back before anyone realizes we're gone. That's insane. It's strategic. Lyra stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Think about it. Right now your court is terrified. They just saw you partially shift. They heard me communicating with your wolf. Half of them think we're cursed. The other half think we're dangerous. If we disappear for a few days on a mission no one else could accomplish, it becomes a legend instead of a weakness. She's not wrong, the wolf said. Fear is useful, but respect is better. Kael's eyes searched hers. You're serious. Completely. You could die. I could die here. At least this way I'm doing something about it. For a long moment, Kael didn't respond. She could see him weighing the options, running through scenarios, calculating risks. Then he turned to the assembled soldiers. The queen and I are leaving, he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Lord Commander, you're in charge until we return. Reinforce the walls, double the watch. No one enters or leaves without authorization. The Lord Commander, a grizzled veteran with more scars than skin, stepped forward. Where are you going, Your Majesty? Hunting, Kyle said. It wasn't an explanation. It was a challenge. No one dared ask for more. They left within the hour. Lyra had changed into travel clothes, thick wool and leather, nothing that marked her as queen. Kyle had done the same, shedding his royal bearing for something more practical. They each carried a pack with supplies, weapons, and enough provisions for a week. The stable master brought their horses, a massive warhorse for Kyle and a smaller, faster mare for Lyra. You can ride? Kyle asked as she mounted. I grew up in the country. We had horses. These aren't cart horses. I'll manage. They rode out through the broken gates as the sun climbed over the mountains. Behind them, the fortress looked like a war zone, scorched, damaged, barely standing. In front of them, the northern wilderness stretched endlessly, frozen and hostile. This is either brilliant or the stupidest thing we've ever done, the wolf said. Both, Kale muttered. They rode in silence for the first few hours, pushing the horses hard to put distance between themselves and the fortress. The landscape was harsh, pine forests giving way to rocky hills, snow covering everything in a white blanket. Lyra's body ached from the ride, her thighs burning, her hands numb despite her gloves. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. If she wanted Kyle to see her as an equal, she had to prove it. It wasn't until they stopped to water the horses at a frozen stream that Kyle finally spoke. You didn't have to do this, he said. Lyra looked up from where she was refilling her water skin. Yes, I did. No, you could have stayed safe behind the walls. Let me handle this. And what would that prove? That I'm a queen in title only? She corked the water skin. I'm tired of being protected, Kale. I'm tired of being treated like I'm made of glass. If I'm going to survive in your world, I need to be more than a symbol. I need to be a threat. Kale's expression was unreadable. You already are. To who? To everyone, including me. The admission hung in the cold air between them. I don't want to be a threat to you, Lyra said quietly. Too late. But there was no anger in his voice, just resignation. You've gotten inside my head, literally. You know things about me no one else knows. You've seen the wolf, talked to him, used him. He looked at her. That kind of intimacy is dangerous. Or it's strength. It's both. He's afraid of you, the wolf said, not because you're dangerous to his life, because you're dangerous to his control. I can hear him, Kyle said. I know. What's he saying? Lyra hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. That you're afraid of me, not physically, emotionally. Kyle's jaw tightened. He's not wrong. Why? Because for 10 years I've kept everyone at a distance, built walls no one could breach, buried every emotion, every weakness, every human impulse so deep that even I forgot they existed. He turned away, staring at the frozen stream. And then you showed up, and within a week you've torn through every defense I have. Lyra's heart hammered in her chest. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. His voice was raw. I've survived this long by being untouchable, by making sure no one ever got close enough to hurt me. But you're already there, already inside, and I don't know what to do about it. Tell her the truth, the wolf urged, the whole truth. What truth? Lyra asked. Kale exhaled slowly. When Moira attacked you in the vault, when I felt your fear through the bond, he paused. I've never felt anything like that. It was like someone had ripped my chest open. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I knew was that you were in danger and I had to get to you. Not because you're my queen, not because losing you would be politically inconvenient, but because the thought of you dying felt like dying myself. The words settled between them, heavy and irrevocable. And that terrifies you, Lyra said softly. Yes, because it's a weakness, because it's real. Kale looked at her, his eyes haunted. Everything else, the throne, the power, the reputation, it's all a mask, a role I play to survive. But this? What I feel when you're threatened, that's not calculated. It's not strategic. It's just human, Lyra finished. Yes. He said it like a confession, like an admission of failure. Lyra stepped closer, her breath misting in the cold air. You've spent so long being the Alpha King that you forgot how to be just Kael. There is no just Kael. There's only the king. Anything else gets people killed. That's not true. Isn't it? Look at what happened. I hesitated during the battle. 1 second of distraction when I saw you and I nearly got cut down. That's what happens when you let emotions interfere. You didn't hesitate, Lyra said firmly. You were fighting like a man possessed until I called out. And then you listened. You adapted. You won. Not in spite of our connection, but because of it. She's right, the wolf said. For the first time in 10 years, you fought with your instincts instead of against them. And it worked. Kael was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched her face, his fingers cold against her skin. You're going to get me killed. Maybe, Lyra said. Or maybe I'm going to keep you alive. His thumb brushed her cheek. You're too confident for someone who's been queen for less than a week. I'm faking it. I know. His mouth quirked, almost a smile. So am I. The moment stretched, fragile and strange. Then Kael pulled away, returning to his horse. We need to keep moving, he said. We have 2 more days of riding before we reach the settlement. Lyra mounted her mare, her heart still racing. That was progress, the wolf said, sounding pleased. He's actually talking about his feelings. Miracles do happen. Don't push it, Lyra murmured. I never push. I encourage. They rode until nightfall, stopping only when the horses needed rest. Kael found a small cave, sheltered from the wind, and they made camp. There was no fire. Too risky. Someone might see the smoke. They ate cold rations in silence, wrapped in their cloaks, the darkness pressing in around them. Tell me about the wolf, Lyra said finally. Kael looked up. What about him? How long have you been able to hear him? Since my first shift, 13 years old. His voice was flat. Most alphas describe it as instinct, a presence, something wordless. But for me, it was always a voice, constant, commenting on everything, questioning every decision. What does he sound like to you? Like me, but without the filter, without the control. Kael's eyes found hers in the darkness. Everything I can't let myself say, he says. Everything I can't let myself feel, he feels. Sounds exhausting. It is. And yet here we are, the wolf said dryly. Still kicking after all these years. He says he's still kicking, Lyra translated. Kael's mouth twitched. Of course he does. Do you hate him? Lyra asked. The wolf. Kael considered the question. I used to. When I was younger, I thought he was a curse, a weakness, something I had to overcome. He paused. Now I think he's the only part of me that's still honest. I'm going to pretend that wasn't almost a compliment, the wolf said, but there was warmth in his voice. He's flattered, Lyra said. Don't tell him that. His ego's already insufferable. Rich, coming from you. Lyra laughed, the sound startling in the quiet cave. Kael stared at her. What? He says that's rich coming from you. Of course he does. But Kael was almost smiling, actually smiling. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less haunted. Lyra felt something shift in her chest, something dangerous and warm and absolutely terrifying. She looked away, focusing on adjusting her bedroll. Get some sleep, Kael said. I'll take first watch. Wake me in 4 hours. We'll trade. You don't know how to keep watch. Then teach me. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. 4 hours. Lyra lay down, pulling her cloak tight around her. The cave floor was hard, the cold seeping through the bedroll, but she was too exhausted to care. As she drifted off, she felt the bond pulse gently. Kael's presence steady and watchful. Sleep, the wolf murmured. We've got you. And for the first time since arriving in the north, Lyra felt safe. The mining settlement appeared on the 3rd day, hidden in a narrow valley between 2 mountains. It was larger than Lyra expected, dozens of buildings, all abandoned and falling apart, but still structurally sound enough to house people. They left the horses tied in a grove of pines and approached on foot, moving carefully through the snow. Guards, the wolf said, 2 on the north side,
3 on the south, and 1 walking patrol. How can you tell? Lyra whispered.
Scent. Heartbeats.
Kale's voice was low. The wolf can sense them.
They circled the settlement, staying in the tree line, until they found the building where the hostages were being kept. It was one of the old miners' barracks, windows boarded up, a single guard posted at the door.
How many inside, Bess? Lyra asked.
Kale closed his eyes, concentrating. 23, all with elevated heart rates, frightened.
Can you get us in without being seen?
Probably, but getting out will be harder. He looked at her. Once we free them, we'll have minutes before the entire camp descends on us.
Then we need a distraction.
I like where this is going, the wolf said.
Lyra pointed to a building on the far side of the settlement.
That one looks like a storage house, probably supplies, food, weapons.
You want to burn it. I want to create chaos. She met his eyes. Can you do it without being caught? Kale's smile was predatory. Yes.
They split up. Kale disappeared into the shadows, moving with inhuman silence, while Lyra positioned herself near the barracks. She didn't have to wait long. Fire erupted on the far side of the settlement, flames shooting into the sky. Shouts echoed through the valley as guards ran toward the blaze. The guard at the barracks door hesitated, torn between his post and the emergency. Lyra made the decision for him. She stepped out of the trees, a rock in her hand, and threw it at one of the buildings. It clattered loudly against the wood. The guard spun, his hand on his sword, and ran toward the sound. Lyra sprinted to the barracks door. It was barred from the outside, a heavy beam of wood across iron brackets. She lifted it, her arm shaking, and pulled the door open. Inside, terrified faces stared back at her. Men, women, children, all huddled together in the darkness.
I'm here to get you out, Lyra said, but we have to move fast. A woman stepped forward, clutching a small girl to her chest. Who are you?
Someone who keeps her promises. Come on.
They filed out quickly, quiet and desperate. Lyra counted them as they passed, 23, just as Kyle had said. The last one out was a girl, maybe 8 years old, with dark hair and frightened eyes. Are you Finn's daughter? Lyra asked. The girl nodded. Your father's waiting for you. Let's go.
They ran for the trees, the hostages stumbling through the snow. Behind them, the settlement was chaos, guards shouting, the fire spreading, smoke billowing into the sky. Kyle appeared beside her like a ghost. Northwest path, I cleared it. They ran together, herding the hostages through the forest. Some of them were crying, others were too shocked to speak. They were almost to the horses when the pursuit started. Lyra heard them before she saw them. Shouts, the crash of men running through the trees. Go, Kale said, pushing her forward. Get them to the horses. What are you? Go. He turned back, drawing his sword, and the wolf's presence surged through the bond, powerful, feral, ready. Lyra wanted to argue, wanted to stay and fight beside him, but the hostages needed her. She ran, leading the group through the trees, her lungs burning. They reached the horses, and she started helping people mount, doubling them up, cramming as many as possible onto each animal. Behind her, she heard steel on steel, snarls, screams. He's winning, the wolf said, but barely. How many? Lyra asked aloud. 6. No, 7. One of them is good, really good. Lyra's hands shook as she lifted the last child onto a horse. Ride south. Don't stop until you reach the fortress. Tell them the queen sent you. What about you? The woman with the dark-haired girl asked. I'm not leaving without the king. She grabbed a fallen branch, thick and heavy, and ran back toward the fighting. She found Kyle surrounded, his back against a tree, 3 men closing in. His shirt was torn, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. His sword was gone, knocked from his hand. The wolf was there, just beneath the surface, but Kyle was fighting it, refusing to shift fully, trying to maintain control even as it got him killed. Lyra didn't think, she just swung. The branch caught one of the attackers across the back of the head. He went down hard. Kale used the distraction to grab his sword and drive it through another man's chest. The third attacker turned on Lyra. She raised the branch, her heart hammering, knowing it wouldn't be enough. Then Kyle was there, tackling the man, and this time he didn't hold back. He shifted. Not fully, but enough. His eyes blazed gold, his movements becoming something other than human, and when his hand closed around the attacker's throat, claws extended. The man's scream cut off with a wet, choking sound. Silence fell. Kyle stood over the body, his chest heaving, his eyes still wrong. He looked at Lyra, and for a moment she saw pure animal instinct staring back. Then he blinked, and it was gone. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "No. You?" "I'll live." He looked around at the bodies, at the blood staining the snow. "The hostages?" "Safe. I sent them south." Kael nodded slowly. Then he did something that shocked her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "Don't ever do that again," he said into her hair. "Do what?" "Run toward danger when I tell you to run away. I couldn't leave you." "I know." His grip tightened. "That's the problem. And the solution," the wolf added quietly. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by death and snow, holding each other like they were the only solid things in a shifting world. Then Kael pulled back. "We need to move. There might be more." They ran together side by side, back to where their horses waited. The ride back to the fortress took 2 days of hard travel. When they finally crested the hill and saw the walls rising in the distance, Lyra felt something in her chest loosen. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd freed the hostages and survived. But as they rode through the gates, they found the entire fortress waiting. The Lord Commander stepped forward, his expression grim. "Your Majesties, the hostages arrived yesterday. They've been telling stories about how you freed them, about what they saw." "And?" Kael asked. "And the court wants answers about the bond, about the wolf, about what you are." Kael's jaw tightened. "Then they'll get them." He dismounted and walked into the great hall, Lyra following. The lords were assembled, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. At the front, Lord Davrick stood with his arms crossed. "You led a rescue mission without informing the council," Davrick said. "You risked both of your lives on an unsanctioned operation." "And succeeded," Kael said flatly. "That's not the point." "The point," Kael interrupted, his voice carrying across the hall, "is that 23 innocent people are alive today because we took action, because we didn't wait for approval or consensus or permission from a council that's been infiltrated by traitors." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "The hostages speak of witnessing unnatural abilities," another lord said. "Claims that the queen knew things she shouldn't, that she communicated with you without words." "She did," Kael said simply. The hall went silent. "The bond between us is stronger than typical alpha pairs," Kael continued. "She can hear my wolf, communicate with him, use his tactical knowledge. It's not corruption, it's not possession, it's a weapon, one that just saved 24 lives and exposed a conspiracy that's been bleeding this kingdom for months." "Or it's a curse," Lady Thorne said from the back. "A sign that the queen is—" "The queen," Lyra interrupted, stepping forward, "is standing right here, and she's tired of being talked about like she's not in the room." She turned to face the assembled lords, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "You want to know what I am? I'm someone who refused to die quietly, who learned to use every advantage she had, no matter how strange, to survive in a court that's been trying to kill her since the moment she arrived. The bond with the wolf isn't a curse. It's the only reason your king is still alive. The only reason any of us survived that battle." She pointed to the scarred fortress walls, visible through the windows. "You talk about what's natural, what's proper, what's acceptable. But your natural order was infiltrated by traitors. Your proper channels were corrupted by conspiracy. And your acceptable methods got 40 soldiers killed defending walls that should never have been breached." Her voice rose, echoing off the stone. "I am not traditional. I am not what you expected. But I am what this kingdom needs right now, someone who sees the threats you've been ignoring, someone who acts when you hesitate, someone who refuses to play by rules that are designed to keep you comfortable and me powerless." She locked eyes with Davrick. "So yes, I can hear the wolf. I can use his knowledge. And if that makes me dangerous, if that makes me unnatural, if that makes me a threat—" She smiled, cold and sharp. "Good." The hall erupted into chaos, some lords shouting in protest, others nodding in grudging respect. But Kael was smiling, actually smiling, wide and genuine and almost proud. He raised his hand and the hall fell silent. The queen has spoken, he said, and she's right. The old ways failed us. The old rules protected our enemies, so we're changing them. Starting now, Queen Lyra has full authority to investigate any lord, any house, any transaction she deems suspicious. She will have access to all archives, all financial records, all correspondence. That's unprecedented, Davrick protested. So is surviving 3 assassination attempts in 1 week. Kale's voice was ice. Anyone who objects can leave permanently. No one moved. Good. Kale turned to Lyra. Find Kay. Find whoever's been orchestrating this, and tear their conspiracy apart. Lyra nodded, feeling power settle over her shoulders like a cloak. She wasn't just a symbol anymore. She was a weapon, and everyone in that hall knew it. Lyra spent the next 3 days buried in documents. The archives became her fortress, the ledgers, her weapons. She worked through the night, candles burning down to stubs, her eyes burning from reading cramped handwriting and coded transactions. Kale had given her authority, but authority meant nothing without proof. She needed to find Kay. You're going to go blind if you keep this up, the wolf said as dawn broke on the 4th day. Then you'll have to be my eyes, Lyra muttered, flipping to another page of financial records. She'd been tracking payment patterns, looking for anomalies. Large sums moving through intermediaries, shipments that didn't match their manifests, accounts that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. And slowly, a pattern was emerging. Every transaction connected to the conspiracy led back to a single banking house in the capital, a respected institution that handled finances for half the noble houses in the kingdom, including the crown. Lyra sat back, her heart racing. The royal treasury. Someone with access to the king's own finances was funding the conspiracy. It narrows it down, the wolf said grimly. Only 3 people have that kind of access. Lyra knew who they were. The Lord Treasurer, the Master of Coin, and Kael's personal steward, an old man named Marcus who'd served the crown for 30 years. One of them was Kay. She gathered the documents and went to find Kael. He was in the training yard working with a group of new recruits. His shirt was off despite the cold, his body a map of scars and muscle, moving through sword forms with brutal precision. The recruits were trying to keep up, failing. Lyra waited at the edge of the yard, watching. She'd seen Kael fight before, in battle, in training, always controlled, always calculated. But there was something different now, a fluidity to his movements that hadn't been there before. He was fighting with the wolf, not against it. He's learning, the wolf said, sounding pleased. Finally. Kael finished the drill and dismissed the recruits. They fled gratefully, leaving him alone in the yard. He grabbed a towel and walked over to Lyra. You found something. It wasn't a question. Yes, but you're not going to like it. They went to his study. Lyra spread the documents across his desk, pointing out the connections, the patterns, the trail of money that led directly to the royal treasury. Kael's face went dark as he read. One of them is a traitor, he said flatly. Yes. The question is which one? Marcus has been with my family since I was a child. He helped my father run the kingdom. Kael's jaw tightened. The Lord Treasurer is young, ambitious, but he came highly recommended, and the Master of Coin is new, appointed just last year after the previous one died. Died how? The wolf asked sharply. How did the previous Master of Coin die? Lyra asked. Kale frowned. Illness, or so we were told. He collapsed during a council meeting and never woke up. Was there an investigation? No, he was old. It seemed natural. Nothing about this is natural, the wolf said. Lyra's mind raced. Who appointed the new Master of Coin? The council, on Marcus's recommendation. The pieces clicked together. It's Marcus, Lyra said quietly. Kyle's head snapped up. That's impossible. He's loyal. He's been... The perfect cover, Lyra interrupted. Think about it. He's been here for decades. He has access to everything. Everyone trusts him. Who would suspect the old family retainer? That's not proof. No, but it's enough to ask questions. Lyra met his eyes. We need to confront him, tonight, before he realizes we're getting close. Kyle stared at the documents for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. If you're wrong about this, I'm not. You'd better not be. They found Marcus in the treasury, reviewing the quarterly accounts. He looked up as they entered, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Your Majesties, I wasn't expecting you." "We have questions," Kael said, his voice neutral, "about some irregularities in the accounts." Marcus's smile didn't falter. "Of course. I'm happy to help with anything you need." Lyra set the documents on the desk between them. "These transactions, large sums moving through intermediary accounts. Can you explain them?" Marcus leaned forward, studying the pages. His expression was perfectly calm, perfectly professional. "Those are discretionary funds," he said, "for the king's personal use, completely standard." "Except they're not going to the king," Lyra said. "They're going to a banking house in the capital, which then distributes them to various recipients. Recipients who match the profiles of everyone involved in the conspiracy against the crown." Marcus's eyes flicked to her, then back to the documents. "I'm sure there's an explanation." "I'm sure there is," Lyra said. "So explain it." The room went silent. Marcus set down the papers carefully. When he looked up, his friendly expression had vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You're very clever, Your Majesty," he said, "for a southern girl who's only been here a few weeks." "There it is," the wolf said. Kael's hand moved to his sword. "Marcus, it's nothing personal, you understand," Marcus continued, his voice perfectly calm. "I've served your family faithfully for 3 decades. But times change, leadership changes, and sometimes loyalty requires making difficult decisions." "Like funding a conspiracy to overthrow the king you claim to serve?" Lyra asked. "Like ensuring the kingdom's survival." Marcus stood, his movements unhurried. "Your father was a brutal tyrant, Kael. He ruled through fear and violence. You were supposed to be different, supposed to be better. But instead you became him, silent, cold, disconnected from your own people." "So you decided to replace me," Kael said, his voice deadly quiet. "I decided to save the kingdom from tearing itself apart." Marcus's eyes were hard. "You're not fit to rule. You can't even control your own wolf. You've buried it so deep that you're only half alive, half a king." "And who did you plan to put on the throne?" Lyra asked. "Marin? Moira? Whoever was strong enough to take it." Marcus smiled. "That's how it works in the north. Power goes to those who can hold it, not those who inherit it." Kael moved so fast Lyra barely saw him. One moment Marcus was standing, the next he was slammed against the wall, Kael's hand at his throat. "You poisoned the previous master of coin," Kael said. "You orchestrated the attacks. You've been bleeding the treasury for over a year." Marcus's face was turning purple, but he managed to smile. "Prove it." "I don't need to prove it. I'm the king." "Then kill me," Marcus wheezed. "But it won't change anything. The conspiracy is bigger than me, deeper than you know. You've cut off one head, but there are others, and they're coming for you." "He's stalling," the wolf said urgently. "He's waiting for something." Lyra's instincts screamed, "Kael, let him go!" Kael's eyes found hers, questioning. "Let him go," she repeated. "He wants you to kill him. He's baiting you." Kael's jaw clenched, but he released Marcus, who collapsed to the floor, coughing. "Why?" Kael asked Lyra. "Because if you kill him now, in front of no witnesses, it looks like tyranny, like you're executing people without trial." Lyra kept her eyes on Marcus. "He wants to make you look like your father, like the monster everyone fears." Marcus's smile confirmed it. "But we're not going to give him that," Lyra continued. "We're going to try him, publicly. Let the whole court see the evidence. Let them decide his guilt." "That's risky," Kael said. "So is summary execution." Lyra looked at him. "You said you wanted to be better than your father. Prove it." For a long moment, Kael didn't move. Then he called for the guards. "Take him to the cells," he ordered. "He stands trial tomorrow." As Marcus was dragged away, he laughed. "You're making a mistake, boy. The trial will tear the court apart. They'll demand proof you can't provide. And when you fail to deliver, they'll turn on you." "Then I'll give them proof they can't ignore," Lyra said. The trial was held in the great hall, every seat filled, lords and ladies packed shoulder to shoulder. The air was electric with tension and speculation. Marcus stood in chains at the center of the hall, his expression serene. He looked like a martyr, not a traitor. Kael sat on his throne, Lyra beside him. The council was arrayed below them, ready to hear the evidence. Lord Davrick, acting as chief magistrate, called the proceedings to order. Marquis of House Thane, you stand accused of conspiracy against the crown, embezzlement, and treason. How do you plead? Not guilty, Marcus said calmly. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The crown will present its evidence, Davrick said, looking at Kyle. Kyle nodded to Lyra. She stood, her heart hammering, and walked to the center of the hall. In her hands were the documents she'd spent days compiling, organizing, cross-referencing. Over the past year, she began, her voice carrying across the hall, the Royal Treasury has lost nearly a quarter of its reserves. The official records show routine expenditures, supplies, wages, maintenance. But when you cross-reference the manifests with the actual deliveries, the numbers don't match. She held up 2 ledgers showing the discrepancies. Shipments that were never received, payments to suppliers who don't exist, transfers to accounts that disappear the moment the money arrives. She pointed to Marcus. All of it approved by the royal steward. That's circumstantial, one of the lords called out. Clerical errors happen. Not for years at a time, Lyra countered, not with this level of precision. Every fraudulent transaction was carefully calculated to avoid detection, small enough not to raise alarms, frequent enough to add up to a fortune. She pulled out another document. This is a letter, seized from Lord Marin's cell. It discusses payments and coordination with someone identified only as K. The handwriting matches Marcus's personal correspondence. She held both documents up for the court to see. Marcus's expression flickered, just for a second. Still circumstantial, Davrick said, though he looked uncertain. Then there's this, Lyra said, producing a final document. 3 days ago, I sent a message to the banking house in the capital, posing as Marcus. I requested a full accounting of transactions under his personal seal. She unrolled the parchment. They responded this morning. Every payment, every transfer, every recipient, all of it documented, all of it illegal, all of it signed with Marcus's authority. The hall erupted into chaos. Marcus's face had gone pale. You had no right, he started. I had every right, Lyra interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise. The king granted me full investigative authority, which means I can request records, question witnesses, and expose traitors wherever I find them. She turned to face the court. Marquis of House Thane betrayed the crown for profit. He funded a conspiracy that killed 40 soldiers, nearly destroyed this fortress, and held innocent families hostage. The evidence is irrefutable. She set the documents on the magistrate's table. The only question is what we do about it. Silence fell. Davrick reviewed the documents, his face growing darker with each page. Finally, he looked up at Kael. The evidence is compelling, Your Majesty. I recommend death, a voice called from the crowd. Execute the traitor. Others took up the cry. Death! 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 Lyra looked at Kael. His face was stone, his eyes unreadable. This is the moment, the wolf said quietly. What you do now defines everything that comes after. Kael stood, and the hall fell silent. Marcus served my family for 3 decades, he said, his voice echoing off the stone. He taught me statecraft, helped me navigate the complexities of rule, and he betrayed me. He walked down from the dais, stopping in front of Marcus. My father would have had you executed immediately. No trial, no evidence, just the blade. Kael's eyes were cold. But I'm not my father. He turned to face the court. Marcus will be stripped of his titles, his lands, and his wealth. Everything he owns will be seized and distributed to the families of the soldiers who died defending this fortress. He will spend the rest of his life in the cells, with nothing but time to contemplate his crimes. That's too merciful, someone shouted. Maybe, Kael agreed, but it's just. And justice is what separates us from the tyrants who came before. He looked back at Marcus. You wanted to prove I was unfit to rule, that I was weak. But strength isn't just violence. It's knowing when to show mercy, when to rebuild instead of destroy. Marcus stared at him, something like surprise crossing his face. Take him away, Kael ordered. As the guards dragged Marcus from the hall, the old man looked back one last time. You've changed, he said quietly. Yes, Kael agreed. I have. The trial's aftermath rippled through the court like a shockwave. Lords who had been plotting in the shadows suddenly became very cooperative, very transparent. The treasury was audited top to bottom. New safeguards were put in place, and Lyra became the most feared person in the kingdom. She used her new authority ruthlessly, investigating anyone with even a hint of corruption. Some lords fled rather than face her scrutiny. Others bent the knee and swore renewed loyalty. Within a month, the court was transformed, but the real change was happening in private. Lyra stood on the battlements one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains. The fortress had been repaired, the walls reinforced, the scars of battle slowly healing. Kyle found her there, as she'd known he would. "You two are predictable," the wolf said fondly. "Shut up," they both said simultaneously, then looked at each other and laughed. "How's the new master of coin working out?" Lyra asked. "Terrified," Kyle said. "Which is probably healthy. You scared everyone into honesty." "Good." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. "I've been thinking," Kyle said finally, "about what you said during the trial. About justice. About being better. And you were right. I've spent so long being what I thought a king should be, hard, cold, unyielding, that I forgot there were other options." He looked at her. "You showed me those options." "I just pointed out what was already there," Lyra said. "The capacity for mercy, for change. It was always in you. You just needed permission to use it." "Permission from a Southern archivist who's been queen for less than 2 months," Kyle said, but he was smiling. "The best kind of permission. Are you two going to keep dancing around this, or are we finally going to address the obvious?" the wolf asked. "Address what?" Lyra said innocently. "The fact that you're in love with each other." They both froze. "He's..." Kale started. "Definitely not," Lyra said at the same time. "You're both terrible liars," the wolf said. "It's embarrassing." Kale ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "What wasn't?" "This. Us." He gestured between them. "The marriage was political, a treaty, not real," Lyra finished quietly. "Except it is real." Kale's voice was rough. "Somewhere between the assassination attempts and the battles and the conspiracy, it became real. You became..." He stopped, struggling for words. "Essential," Lyra supplied. "That's what you are to me. Essential, like air, like gravity. I didn't choose it. It just happened." Kael's eyes met hers. "I've never felt this way about anyone." "Neither have I." "It's terrifying." "Completely. And also beautiful," the wolf added. "Don't forget that part." Kael stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "I don't know how to do this. How to be both a king and a husband. How to rule and love at the same time." "Then we'll figure it out together," Lyra said. "The same way we figured out everything else. Badly. Messily. But together." He pulled her into his arms, and this time there was no hesitation, no calculation. Just two people who'd found each other in the middle of chaos and decided to hold on. Finally, the wolf said, "I thought you two were never going to get there." "We can still hear you," Kyle muttered against Lyra's hair. "I know. It's part of my charm." 3 months later, Lyra stood in the great hall again. But this time it wasn't for a trial or a battle, it was for a celebration. The rescued hostages had been integrated back into their communities. Finn's daughter was reunited with her father, who'd been pardoned and given work in the fortress guard. The conspiracy's remaining threads had been traced and eliminated, and the kingdom was, for the first time in years, at peace. The feast was genuine this time. No poisoned wine, no hidden threats. Just people celebrating the fact that they'd survived. Lyra watched from the high table as Kyle made a speech, his voice strong and clear. He was wearing the formal robes of state, but he looked comfortable in them now, like he'd finally grown into the role. "He has," the wolf said. "You both have." "Are you getting sentimental?" Lyra asked silently. "Maybe. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation to maintain." When the speech ended, the hall erupted into applause. Kyle returned to his seat beside Lyra, taking her hand under the table. "Still hate feasts?" he asked quietly. "A little less than before," Lyra admitted. Lord Davrick approached the high table, bowing formally. "Your Majesties."
The council has a request. What kind of request? Kael asked, immediately suspicious. We'd like the queen to formalize her role, make her position as chief investigator and reformer official, with a seat on the council. Lyra blinked in surprise. Kael's grip on her hand tightened. The council wants this? Unanimously, Davrick said. You've cleaned house, Your Majesty. Literally. You've made us all better at our jobs by making us actually do them honestly. We'd be fools not to recognize that. He smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuine. Besides, no one wants to be the next person you investigate. Much safer to have you on our side. Lyra laughed. I accept. Just like that? Kael asked. Why not? I've already been doing the job. Might as well make it official.
Look at you, the wolf said proudly. From unwanted bride to the most powerful person in the kingdom. Not bad for a few months' work. That night, after the feast ended and the guests departed, Lyra and Kael returned to their chambers. The room had changed over the months, filled now with Lyra's books, her maps, her organized chaos mixing with Kael's military precision. It looked like a home. Are you happy? Kael asked as they prepared for bed. Lyra considered the question. A few months ago, she'd been miserable. Sold by her father, married to a stranger, thrust into a court that wanted her dead. Now she was exactly where she wanted to be. Yes, she said. Are you? Kael pulled her close. More than I thought possible. Group hug, the wolf said cheerfully. Absolutely not, Kael said. Fine, but I'm claiming credit for this whole thing. None of it would have happened without me. He's not wrong, Lyra said. Don't encourage him. Too late. I'm already encouraged. They fell asleep tangled together, the bond between them humming quietly, peacefully. And in the morning, they woke to a kingdom they'd helped transform. Not through fear or violence, but through honesty, courage, and the willingness to trust each other. The legend of the Alpha King was reborn, not as a silent monster ruling through terror, but as a leader who'd learned to listen. To his wolf, to his queen, to the better angels of his nature. And beside him stood a queen who'd started as nothing and become everything. Who'd turned her supposed weaknesses into weapons. Who'd proven that intelligence and courage mattered more than bloodlines or tradition. Together, with the ever-present voice of the wolf offering commentary, they forged a new order where strength, honesty, and trust replaced terror. In a land once ruled by silence, their bond became the force that united and transformed an entire realm. Lyra stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the mountains, and smiled. She'd come north expecting to die. Instead, she'd learned to live, and that made all the difference. Ready for another day of politics and intrigue? The wolf asked. Always, Lyra said. Kael wrapped his arms around her from behind. Just another normal day ruling a kingdom. Nothing about this is normal, Lyra said. Thank the stars for that, Kael replied. And together they walked out to face whatever came next. Not as king and political arrangement, not as alpha and unwanted bride, but as partners. Equals. Two halves of something unprecedented and powerful and completely their own. The North had tested them, broken them, rebuilt them. And now it was theirs. Every frozen mountain, every brutal tradition, every impossible challenge, theirs to change, theirs to protect, theirs to rule, not through fear, through love. And in the end, that proved to be the strongest weapon of all.